You are listening to The Central Cast, a podcast for mystics and misfits just like you, recorded every week in Pasadena, California, before a live audience. Thanks for tuning in. All right. Thanks, Dorian. All right. I think one of the least talked about and most radical ideas that we find in the scriptures is this one that Bob and Dorian already brought up today, and that I'm going to be talking about, is this principle, this idea of welcoming the stranger. And I think if we take this idea to its ultimate conclusions, it's deeply affirming of the LGBTQ community. You know, a synonym for the word strange is queer, right? Therefore, to welcome the stranger literally means to welcome the queer, the so-called strange, the different, and the other. And so we can expand this idea of welcoming the stranger out even further and talk about how it means welcoming anyone who is deemed other than and quote unquote, strange by the status quo. But before we dive in, I want to be clear that I don't believe that the Bible is affirming in any kind of overt way. Instead, I think it reflects a very ancient and primitive understanding of human sexuality and gender roles. What else would we expect from people living in the Iron Age and classical antiquity, right? But that doesn't mean there aren't ideas in the text and themes in the scriptures that if we follow to their ultimate conclusions and emphasize their underlying spirit, they can be radically liberating, life-giving, and affirming in a variety of ways. Now, this doesn't mean that we just make the text say whatever we want. Rather, we draw out and we emphasize its underlying spirit, the underlying spirit of what's written, and apply it then to specific issues. I like to think of the text as a living document that the Spirit is still speaking through today in ways that the original authors could not have foreseen. They were just people like us, people of their time. But I think we should take our cues from what they wrote about things like radical inclusion and unconditional love, living by the Spirit instead of living by religious law, the critique of idols, the critique of false gods, and then these themes and these ideas they wrote about pertaining to God's preference for the vulnerable, God's preference for the poor and the powerless, God's preference for the outcast, the outsider, and of course, God's preference for the stranger. And it's this last principle of God's preference for the stranger that I want to focus on here today. And we first find this imperative, this command given to ancient Israel in the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, what we call the Old Testament. And Israel was told to show hospitality and welcome strangers and foreigners because the reason why was because you were once strangers and foreigners in Egypt. This is the reasoning that Israel is given. And thus they were told to welcome the stranger and the foreigner as a demonstration or a reminder of God's care and concern for the vulnerable, for the needy among them. Jesus then, of course, comes along and takes this idea to the next level as he goes out of his way to welcome the strangers and the foreigners and the outsiders in his midst, not just Samaritans and Gentiles, non-Jews, but he goes out of his way to welcome all the so-called outsiders and outcasts of his day. And this, of course, made many of his contemporaries angry because true hospitality for strangers and outcasts is inherently deconstructive of certain social hierarchies, power dynamics, and the ideologies that support them. Notice when Jesus welcomed and showed hospitality to outsiders and outcasts, he was disregarding the rigid religious purity laws of his day and the scriptures that supported these laws, these rules about who was, holy and pure and touchable and who was not, who could be cavorted with and included and who certainly could not be. He just disregarded all of that, including the text including the scriptures that supported such ideas. This reveals the deeper, we would say, deconstructive and iconoclastic nature of what it means to welcome the stranger. To truly welcome the stranger is inherently deconstructive of all kinds of power dynamics, because to truly welcome the stranger means seeing those with different beliefs and practices as equals. That's pretty radical stuff if you're in this kind of insular religious community, right? Because it means taking a position of radical humility rather than judgmentalism. Radical humility about one's own beliefs and worldviews, a worldview and practices, and it means embracing a kind of ego death, the death of any kind of supremacist notions about your religion, your culture, your beliefs and practices. It means not just seeing the other's religion and worldview, beliefs and practices as cultural constructs, but it means seeing one's own religion and worldview, beliefs and practices as cultural constructs rooted in history, rooted in a particular place and time, contingent, human in nature, rather than divine revelation that just fell out of heaven one day, right? That's pretty radical. And that's really hard, if not impossible, for certain people to recognize who are deeply invested in the certainty and security and sense of supremacy they get from believing that their religion is the only right one and their religion and worldview is divine revelation rather than a cultural construct like yours, like all the others, right? And this is why so many churches love to say, and you've seen it on the church signs, all are welcome, right? Everybody's welcome. But then you go inside and you quickly discover, you read the fine print, as it were, and you quickly discover, yes, okay, all are welcome to, come inside and sit in the pew and enjoy the music and put money in the offering plate and eat the coffee and the snacks. But all are not welcome to truly be themselves if they are queer, or if they are somebody who harbors the wrong beliefs, the wrong ideas about God, Jesus, and the Bible, or who harbors no beliefs, who is agnostic or atheist. Such people soon discover they are not really all that welcome at all. Because again, it's really hard, if not impossible, for those churches to change, because so much of their identity is wrapped up in being right? So much wrapped up in believing that we have all the answers and the one right religion and worldview. You do not. You can come here, but you need to convert. You need to change. You need to become like us. And so it's all about welcoming the same. It's all about entertaining friends and welcoming the same. This is a real problem, because when our beliefs become our identity, when our beliefs become our core identity, we can't be honest with ourselves and others anymore. It makes it really hard. We can't think clearly or critically. We can't grow or take in new information, because when we encounter new information and facts that conflict with and challenge our beliefs and presuppositions, it feels like an existential threat. It feels like a threat to our very identity. The ego has a real hard time with those threats, right? So the trick is to not over-identify with your beliefs. Have your beliefs, yes, and we all have beliefs. Even an atheist, that too is a kind of metaphysical belief, right? The trick is to not over-identify with our beliefs so that we can change when new information comes to light, and so that we don't become arrogant and someone who tries to force everybody to believe and think like we do. That's often what happens when people who over-identify with their beliefs encounter strangers and outsiders. They try to domesticate them and assimilate them, convert them, in other words, to make them like them, because they cannot integrate their difference into their social body, into their ideology, into their worldview. And this, of course, is a fear-based reaction. Fear is the main driver behind why so many people cannot truly welcome the stranger. And to be fair, this is a very human reaction because we are hardwired, all of us, including me. We're all hardwired by millions of years of evolution to fear the strange, to fear the unknown, to fear the outsider. And you can think about why. If we didn't fear these things, we would not have survived for as long as we did. Our ancient ancestors who heard a rustling in the tall grass and thought, it's just the wind, they did not survive as long as those who thought, that could be a predator. Fear has its advantages. Yes, fear has its advantages. This also applies to encountering new people. When our ancient ancestors encountered, new individuals or new tribes, all kinds of bad things could happen. And sometimes did. It was good advice to be wary as a survival technique. Thus, the roots of racism and all kinds of bigotry and xenophobia today can be traced back, at least somewhat, not entirely, but at least somewhat, to our natural fear of the other, the unknown, our natural fear of the stranger and the strange. But we have to transcend this biological programming. We got to grow up. We have to do this in order to become better people, in order to achieve a higher level of consciousness and make the world a more equitable and just place. But again, many cannot or will not do that. They will not unlearn these traits, this biological programming, if you will, because they are beholden to the fear of the other. This also makes them beholden to the political and religious systems that maintain power by leveraging people's innate fear of the other. I'm talking about how the entire right-wing political and religious apparatus today is basically built on fearing the other. Notice what the right, both the religious right, political right, fear. They fear gay people, trans people, people of color, immigrants, Muslims, secular humanists, atheists, socialists, basically anyone who is not like them, meaning anyone who is not what? White, evangelical, straight, patriotic, capitalist. If that's not you, you are to be kept at arm's length and assimilated, hopefully domesticated, converted to their demographic, if you will. The entire right-wing political and religious apparatus is basically built on fearing the stranger, fearing the other, and not welcoming them for fear of what them represents. They represent what? Change. A loss of power and prominence and dominance of white, Christian, male, heterosexual supremacy. Everybody else better get in line because it's our country, damn it. And you're not taking it from us. Right? That's the thinking. It's all about power and dominance for white, straight, evangelical men, basically. The entire right-wing political and religious apparatus, therefore, exists not to promote difference, not to promote and celebrate pluralism, not to promote and celebrate free expression and individuality, not really, but rather it exists to promote conformity and allegiance to a particular authority figure who is often usually white, straight, Christian, and male, right? We know this. Again, the point is to eliminate difference and strangeness, not to promote it. The idea is to promote conformity and sameness instead. The point is not to empower individuals, but to make individuals serve power, serve whiteness, serve Christian nationalism, serve patriarchy, right? That's the system. That's the way it's set up. The current occupant of the White House, despite his egregious lack of intelligence, understood this very well like 10 years ago. He knew he could play on people's fear of the other and use it to his advantage to the degree of ascending even to the presidency of the United States, and therefore becoming arguably the most powerful person in the world. And all he had to do was leverage the rights, the religious rights, innate fear of the other, their innate and instinctual fear of the other. It's a sad commentary on what lies at the heart of millions, tens of millions of Americans. And by Americans, I mean mostly American Christians. It's pretty sad. We should not be surprised, but it is quite sobering and sad. But notice something about all of this. Notice you might say this, that to welcome the stranger is an innately progressive thing to do socially, religiously, and politically, is it not? In other words, to be open to the other, to be radically open to the other, means being open to change, being open to progress, to growth, to expansion, to the novel, to the new. You can't be truly open to the stranger and to the other without really being open to these things. And this strikes me as an innately, quote unquote, progressive position to take socially, politically, and religiously. The inevitable question, I think, for a progressive Christian community like our own becomes this. What does it look like for us today here in a community like this one? What does it look like for us to welcome the other now? Who is the stranger, the outsider, the outcast to us? Well, some would say it's MAGA. It's MAGA, it's evangelicals, it's conservative Christians. We must figure out a way of welcoming them and making them feel comfortable and fully affirmed in their beliefs and values. Otherwise, we're hypocrites. We're just fundamentalists of a new kind. We traded Christian conservative fundamentalism for progressive Christian fundamentalism. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this argument. Maybe you've heard it before too. And to be fair, I think we should make room for people here with some traditional beliefs. There are some relatively harmless traditional beliefs out there, but here's the catch. Here's the catch. You cannot have a healthy, safe, open, and inclusive community by welcoming and affirming unhealthy, unsafe, intolerant views and those who espouse them. It just doesn't work that way. There's a theory called the paradox of tolerance. We should all be familiar with. The paradox of tolerance, it's called, and it was put forward in 1945 by an Austrian philosopher by the name of Karl Popper, who was responding very much to the rise of intolerant ideologies in Europe at that time. Of course, we're talking about fascism. The paradox of tolerance argues that a society which tolerates all ideas, beliefs, and behaviors will eventually succumb to intolerant forces. Therefore, to maintain a tolerant society, one must ultimately be intolerant of intolerance. And I think this applies very well to our conversation today about what it means to be a community that welcomes the stranger. Welcoming the stranger does not mean welcoming intolerance and the intolerant. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't engage in respectful dialogue with such folks or have them in our circle of friends or family. We can, as long as they're not too toxic. And I will leave it up to you to decide for yourself where those boundaries lie for you in your life. But we need to understand that the spirit behind this idea, of welcoming the stranger, does not mean welcoming the intolerant too. Wisdom is knowing the difference between upholding the spirit of a law or a principle or the letter of a law or principle. And Jesus of Nazareth gives us a really great view of what that looks like, right? Jesus, we see him upholding the spirit of the Mosaic law, right? Not the letter of the Mosaic law. Sometimes upholding the letter of a law or principle is actually antithetical to the spirit behind it. Jesus himself reveals this to us. And you could argue it's what got him in a lot of trouble, right? But this is like wisdom 101 stuff. The spirit of a law or principle is sometimes antithetical to the letter of a law or principle. Consider, for example, the law or the principle of truth-telling, not lying, right? If you're hiding Jews in your attic and the Nazis come to your door and ask, do you know where any Jews are hiding? Truth telling in that circumstance doesn't mean telling them the literal truth. Yeah, they're upstairs in my attic. Come and take them away. No, truth telling in that circumstance is you lie in order to protect people. The point is not that sometimes it's okay to do what is wrong and immoral. Lying in this case is not wrong or immoral. It is the only moral choice. Yes? Thus, here we see how the spirit behind truth telling is about upholding a higher truth, the higher truth of human well being. In the same way, to uphold the spirit of welcoming the stranger seems to me does not mean literally welcoming everyone, including the hateful and the intolerant, and saying, you may have a point. Let's welcome that. Let's hear, let's entertain that. Let's affirm that. And that's because the spirit behind the principle of welcoming the stranger is love. It's tolerance. It's human well-being and human freedom. It's like James Baldwin's famous words. You and I can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and the denial of my humanity and right to exist. If that's the case, then I'm sorry we can't be friends anymore. Do those harsh words make James Baldwin an intolerant asshole? No, of course not. The racist white conservative who's demanding that he be nice to them and make them feel welcome and good about themselves, even though they're denying his humanity and right to exist, they're the proponents of intolerance, not him. And the fact that so many people today, not in this room, but so many centrists today and conservatives don't get this is really troubling. I can't tell you how many times I hear centrists and conservatives say, if you progressives and liberals were really inclusive and loving, you would want to welcome my point of view, build bridges with me, find common ground, and make me feel good about myself. But because you're not willing to do this, you're the intolerant ones. You're just a new kind of fundamentalist. You may have deconstructed and left behind your Christian fundamentalism, but now you are a liberal progressive fundamentalist. This line of reasoning makes me want to pull my hair out. You may have noticed. It's not to say that, to be clear, it's not to say that we on the left or us progressive Christians don't have our problems or our blind spots or even a purity culture. I think we do, and it needs to be called out. But the notion that those of us who are striving, for greater freedom, for greater inclusion, greater tolerance, and greater peace for those who have historically been denied those things and maligned and harmed and denied basic human rights like the LGBTQ community has, the notion that we're the proponents of intolerance in the world, that's utter nonsense. And actually, it's also a power play. It's a way for the right to continue doing what they're doing. It's just one more tactic of white, straight, conservative Christians to maintain dominance and control the narrative and control outcomes. So that's my talk today on what it means to welcome the stranger. And as always, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear, if you need a prompt, maybe what does it mean for you to welcome the stranger? Or, where do you think this fear of the stranger, this fear of the other that we see in our culture today is leading? And Jason, I saw that hand.
I don't know where it's leading. I don't have answers to those questions, but I thought of
Why not?
three anecdotes that maybe illustrate the point. One was, and I looked it up on Wikipedia. I think it came out in like 2020, but this guy tells a story of going into a bar, sitting down, eating or drinking, whatever. And then another guy comes in, sits down, and the bartender grabs a bat and says, "Get the hell out of here."
Mm-hmm.
Kicks the guy out. And the first guy is saying, "Well, what happened? Like that guy seemed he was quiet, he wasn't doing anything." And the bartender says, "Well, you did. If you looked at his vest, his vest was full of Nazi shit, like
Mm-hmm.
iron crosses, all this kind of stuff." And the first guy's like, "Well, I mean, he wasn't doing anything." And the bartender basically says, "Look, yeah, it's always the nice, quiet guy first. They come in, they drink, they're quiet, they're nice, they're cool dudes. Then they bring a friend, and that guy's cool. And pretty soon, they bring more people, and next thing you know, this is a Nazi bar because the regulars don't want to come hang out with Nazis, and the whole population has just switched over to Nazi people. So you've got to nip it in the bud at the beginning. You can't let them get space, or they'll change the whole thing. You got to shut it down right away. So yeah, like intolerant of intolerance. Anecdote one. Anecdote two, the lieutenant governor of Texas this week or last week said James Tallarico's going to hell
Yeah, I've heard this.
because he's preaching or talking heresy, saying, and the lieutenant governor is saying, like, I don't know what Bible he's reading. He's not reading my Bible.
Right.
And Tallarico is basically saying, love your neighbor. It's like,
they're losing their minds about it. Yeah.
yeah. So like example of intolerance on that side. And then the contrasting anecdote, I think, is this chant that was going around in New York when the Knicks were playing, which was something like, my mayor's a Muslim, my bagels are Jewish, the Pope's on my side, Nixon 5. And I
Wow.
just thought that was cool. Like, yeah, like almost like a radical acceptance, and like clearly pointing out, we're multicultural here,
Yeah.
and it's okay.
Yeah.
So that was cool.
That is cool. No, they're great anecdotes. Thanks for sharing those. I don't know. I hope those sentiments are enough to keep us from the precipice of wherever the right is trying to take us. I hope. I have hope. But thanks, Jason. Yeah. Others. Anybody else? What is a spark for you? Yeah, Randy.
Thanks. I was just thinking about, is this thing on?
Yeah, it's on. Yeah.
Culture has a lot to it. Like back in the 20s, I think, when FDR was president, pink was a boy's color.
Yeah.
And they used to, how they have opinions about how blue is for men and it's manly and stuff. Back then, it was just the opposite.
Yeah. I
They
remember
said
this. Yeah.
pink is supposed to be for boys and blue is for girls. And that changed, I think, in the 50s with advertisers. So it's about, culture and money and capitalism, as opposed to what a man or a woman is supposed to be, or, what God says about certain things. Because throughout history, things change. I mean, there were times when gay people were accepted in ancient Greek culture or in other cultures, and it changed over the years because people needed a scapegoat to blame someone for their lack of ability to control and the government situation or whatever. So a lot of it, it's more about culture, money, power, as opposed to what God says, whatever your religion. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think so. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah.
It just popped in right here.
Yeah. Other thoughts today? Yeah, Julie.
These are kind of random, but and I think I've said this same exact thing before, but it keeps coming up for me, that as someone who grew up like heavily evangelical, conservative environment, like I didn't know any other environment, any other way to be a Christian. There was always this like, Christians do it, the evangelical Christians do it the best, and we're reacting to the outside world, which is everything that we shouldn't be, and it's everything that is bad in the Bible. And I'm just like, I'm so continually shocked by how now, and in 2026, at this moment, where I'm still deconstructing, I still have that like evangelical voice inside me. But when I look out at quote unquote the world, I see the Jesus that I know there. Not in the evangelical church. Like the attitudes, the language, take something as silly as like Amy Poehler's podcast, Good Hang. Like I listen to that and I'm like, there is love and joy and kindness and empathy there, and I don't see it in the church. And so I'm living in like the upside down, right? Like this is the upside down world according to my upbringing, because it I don't know. I'm just expressing exasperation. Like, I mean, I could name so many people who are, quote, godless or, don't go to church, aren't Christian, whatever the evangelicals will call them, who are, you know, highly ethical people who love others and really take to heart, like, love your neighbor.
Mm.
And it's just like everything has flipped, and
Yeah.
it makes me second guess myself a lot. I'm like, wait, why am I seeing what I think the church should be in totally secular environments and not seeing it in the actual church?
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense.
No, it does. Yep.
And then the other comment is just for you, Aaron. I'm so grateful to be here and to be able to learn from you, because I'm still going through my own deconstruction, and one of the things that's so helpful that you do and that you did this morning is to really connect me with deconstruction as part of the Christian tradition. And so there's this kind of like paradox, I guess, of
Yeah.
how going through deconstruction is connecting me more with Christian tradition than I ever felt connected before, because you are very convincing and very right from everything I know about, Jesus was deconstructing, maybe even the prophets were deconstructing before that, and it's really gratifying and empowering to think that deconstruction is part of the Christian tradition,
Yeah.
and that's what we can identify with in it. Anyway.
Well, no, first of all, thank you. I really have tried over the years to connect those dots for people, because I'm fully convinced that that's spiritual practice, and that's Christian spiritual practice, to critique one's faith, to critique one's ideology, to critique one's religion for the sake of, quote unquote, as Caputo would put it, finding the religion hidden in your religion, which is frankly a Jewish idea. I mean, these ideas are not like Johnny come lately, it's Christian progressives figured this out in the 20th century. This goes back to kind of like this, I think, kind of this intrinsic, enculturated Jewish practice of critiquing and challenging one's own faith and orthodoxies for the sake of, frankly, being like divine, and recognizing that, the whole idea of the prophet challenging the status quo that we find in the writings of the prophets, and calling the people back to God and saying things like, is this not the fast that I have chosen? Is this not pure and undefiled religion, but to love one's neighbor? These ideas are not new. They're deeply Jewish ideas. And if you study Judaism, specifically Jewish thought and rabbinical teachings, you discover this deep love for debate and questioning and kind of entertaining unorthodoxy. Unfortunately, I think Western Eurocentric Protestant, but again, very kind of European Enlightenment, European sort of, it strikes me as very Western, very European, to kind of have this supremacist idea about our writings and our thoughts. And how dare you challenge this, the puritanical, I'm trying to like use words, but it's like not our culture in kind of European in the kind of European Western tradition to challenge things the way that Jews historically have. I don't know. There's something there that I haven't done my homework on it, so I'm being sloppy. But I really think that there's something about whiteness and European history and ancestry and the culture that we got from all that, and the Christianity we got from all that, that just really, really serves power and allegiance to authority and ideology in ways that Middle Eastern, Near Eastern, ancient Jewish traditions just don't really.
Yeah, somehow we like Christians, like, sort of colonized the Hebrew scriptures and then took out, but did not take any of the practice around reading the Hebrew scriptures.
Yeah.
Because it's, in Judaism, as you're saying, like there's thousands of years of the practice of disagreeing with scripture, of wrestling with it and arguing about it. Somehow
Yeah.
the white Christian sort of Anglo-Saxon tradition is like, argument is only for the purpose of coming to a certainty, which we then can put on a stone tablet and hold people to till the end of time.
Yeah, I think even that's a great point. I think, you look at the work of Thomas Aquinas 1,000 years ago and the church's desire to systematize and merge science with theology. I mean, that was a deeply European movement. Scholasticism 1,000 years ago was all about, we are going to merge science and theology and come up with a science of God. I mean, that's European Western history. And yeah, you could go all the way back to Greek thought, trying maybe to do some of that too. Not like 1,000 years ago, what was going on in the scholastics. Yeah, and I'm reminded of an old Jewish joke, and this is a perfect example of what I mean, about two rabbis sitting on a park bench arguing over a scripture, and God is up there listening to them debate this, and he gets so fed up, he finally shines a light on them from the heavens, stops the conversation, and says, here's what I meant in that scripture. And the rabbis look at each other and look to heaven and say, well, who asked you? This is our conversation. This is our text. You won't find that joke in Christianity. That is a
To be in our place.
yeah. No, it's really
Just look at Jesus. Just look at it. It just feels like it's been about. It feels like moving. Is that? So it's causing all.
Thanks for listening in on this week's edition of the Central Cast. Hope you enjoyed it and hope you join us next time. Bye-bye.